All right. Hello and welcome to our 7th webinar on Labstep for Success Collaboration. And in this webinar, we will share our solution to address common problems that are faced in academia when it comes to collaborating, whether that's in teams or across departments. We also share our best practices for individual academics, lab groups, and whole institutes wanting to use Labstep. So before we begin, I would like to introduce myself. So my name is Anoä and I am in charge of customer support and experience here at Labstep. And today I am joined by Amira Fitzpatrick and Ethan Espina, our 2 customer success managers. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anoä. How are you?
I'm good as well, thanks. What about you, Ethan?
All good as well. All good.
Nice. All right, just to do a little bit of housekeeping and then I promise we'll get started. So you might have noticed that both your cameras and microphones are disabled. It's completely normal. Don't worry about that. In this webinar, only the chat and Q&A function will work. So just to give you a little overview of the webinar, so it will last about 25 minutes and then we will leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end for some question. That will be your time to shine and ask all of the questions that you want to know. And yeah, Ethan, take it away.
Right, thanks, Anoä. So starting off, I think the best question to ask is, why is transitioning from paper lab notebooks to electronic or digital lab notebooks important anyway? And to boil it down, it's that there's many benefits over paper systems. The benefits include improved traceability over paper, as well as visibility over the audit trail. It also allows for real-time data capture in the lab whilst keeping resources up to date. Cloud-based platforms such as Labstep allow for inter and intra-team collaboration, and they also open up the possibility for automating repetitive tasks such as templates, or by using templates on metadata fields. And lastly, there's a greater sense of data privacy and security as well. And again, that's all possible on a centralized platform like Labstep, because it's a cloud-based research and development software, which acts as a connected operating system for researchers. Now, for students and academic researchers, this means that old paper notebook processes like printing experiments for sharing, managing the different systems your team might use for things like inventory, such as Google Docs, Excel files, along with personal paper notebooks, all become outdated. Everything is also updated in real time, and again, is on one centralized platform, which means retroactive write-up is no longer necessary. And that sort of practice just opens up potential for inaccuracies anyway. And ultimately, collaboration becomes a seamless process. Now, for those in larger organizations and those in industry, it means the previous benefits I've mentioned, but also that Labstep can support your organization by future-proofing potential growth and scalability issues. If you watched our last webinar, which focuses on growth and scalability, Amira discussed the ways in which Labstep provides tools to catalyze your growth while still remaining scalable. Amira, would you be able to kindly give us a summary of the last webinar?
Yeah, I'd love to. So in the last webinar, we spoke about my best tips for successful growth and scalability within your organization through Labstep. So these also go hand in hand with collaboration. So you'll maybe scaling and collaborating all at the same time. So I mentioned for smooth scaling, you can quickly add and remove users from your organization as your team grows and it fluctuates. Just don't forget to inform us that your billing is correct, whether you're adding or removing users. I also emphasize that using collections to sort experiments and protocols adds a level of structure and hierarchy within your team. And this is great to start doing as soon as you start on Labstep, because then as your organization grows, you'll have a sorted workspace and you can use that system implemented on your new workspaces. Admins can use activity dashboards, which help them scale by being able to see and track how workspaces, inventory, and protocols are being used. I spoke about the ability to connect instruments and devices using Labstep's powerful API to quickly fetch data from folders on your laptop or desktop and quickly get them into Labstep to analyze. This saves you time searching for the data, and you can also boost your workflow by using the booking system in each instrument or device to avoid clashes. And then finally, and a bit biased, I spoke about the customer support team. So that involves me, Ethan, and our head of customer success, Eloise, and we're here to help you have a point of contact for Labstep. We'll help you through renewals, expansion, any projects you have, and we're always here to help you scale up and collaborate with confidence.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Amira. Now, Ethan, I think the question here is all about collaborating. So what elements of the platform can be used for collaboration? What are the best features that you kind of recommend for that?
Yeah, I mean, I could recommend a lot because Labstep's one of Labstep's main focuses is improving collaboration in teams. We constantly work hard to either upgrade current features or implement new ones to support this. And a lot of that is based on feedback from our users. Because ultimately, when you improve collaboration in teams, productivity also drives up. And like I said, there's quite a few features with collaboration in mind, but I'll give some of the best ones here. The first one is our custom roles and permissions. This tool has received consistent optimization over the past few months, and now it's more powerful than ever. Aside from the default roles that are provided for you by Labstep, which are viewer, editor, and owner, you can now create your own roles, for example, intern, principal investigator, or lab manager, just as a few examples. And then what you can do is you can delegate the appropriate permission levels for each user and for every module and action in Labstep. So, for example, an intern, you might want them to only edit experiments that are related to them. So you can then change the edit permissions to if assigned. And then for protocols, which rarely go through changes and are typically strictly regulated, you can set those edit permissions to never. And then what you can do is then you can assign these roles per workspace. The tool essentially allows you to have fine-grained control over the actions of your team members in each workspace, which is super relevant as your team scales up, but that level of control and visibility also improves collaboration. And by keeping things consistent in that way, team members can work on what's most relevant to them, whilst keeping data consistent in areas that are less relevant and leaving that to the team members that are better suited for the job. The next feature, which is collections, whilst key for scalability, as Amira kindly pointed out, also remain relevant with regards to collaboration. Collections allow you to sort your experiments and protocols in a handful of ways, for example, by projects, topics, or team members. And this allows you to keep an organized record of all your work that's both accessible and visible, regardless of the size of your team.
Nice. So now that we've talked about collections and we've kind of started to explore as well collaboration, what can we also have something about sharing? What can be done in terms of sharing?
Yeah, so you can share almost any module of Labstep to other workspaces easily by using the share tool. And you can do that individually or in bulk. And when you do share, you can set the view or edit permissions there as well. Alternatively, if you simply want to share within the same workspace, you can use the assign to mechanism to assign the work to another member, which will grant them permissions that they might have not had before. And the alternative is if you want to bulk share content of your workspace and on a regular schedule. With our auto sharing tool, that's now really easy to do. Workspace owners can create rules to auto share entire Labstep modules to other workspaces automatically, which removes those manual steps of constantly having to set aside time in the week just to share content across workspaces.
And so what modules of Labstep can be shared?
Yeah, so when I say almost any module, I do mean it. So experiments, protocols, resources, locations, instruments and devices, all the way to even smaller things like tags and order requests.
Great. So are there any other features that you recommend for collaboration?
Yeah, of course. The other collaborative pieces of Labstep, which I actually personally really appreciate, is notes and comments. With notes and comments, Labstep provides a way of keeping daily or long experiments clean and organized. There are a few iterations of notes, with those being personal notes, the message board, and notes found in experiments and protocols. And in those, you can write your daily tasks for visibility, tag relevant team members in case you need to inform them something, or even pin notes at the top so it's the first thing people see. Comments are similar to notes, but are a little more specific. You can add those to specific experiment entries, highlight a particular sentence and say something like, this needs to be resolved. And once done, the comment can be cleared. And another piece that adds to communication in Labstep is the signature system. In experiments, you can control these with the roles and permissions as well. The signature system allows you to request signatures from team members and also sign off those experiments. You can also set templates for signatures and templates for the signature request to streamline that process further whilst maintaining consistency as well.
Wonderful. So just to summarize this part, so we've seen the signature system, the collections, the custom roles and permissions, and the sharing features as well, which includes the auto sharing tool and assign to feature, correct?
Yeah.
Great. So now can you maybe walk us through the best practices for each different type of academic users that we have on the platform?
Yeah, of course. And I have a few examples here with different sizes. So for the first one, my example are individual academics. These typically include anything that ranges from undergrads to all the way to PhD students. And during their research projects, they tend to conduct their own projects and research, but are supervised by a principal investigator. And this means that an element of collaboration still remains, and Labstep provides tools to facilitate that, as well as good scientific practices. The example here I have here is none other than myself, because during my master's, I worked within a group of doctors and neurosurgeons who specialized in brain tumors and stem cells at a university hospital. Now, that lab had a system that many of you are probably familiar with, which is a mix of paper notebooks as well as online word processors and sharing platforms such as Google Docs and Dropbox. Now, thankfully, we had a great postdoc there who kept everything in check and organized whilst also conducting their own research. So she had her work cut out for her, basically. However, without her and without a real-time updated centralized system like Labstep, projects are extremely prone to becoming inaccurate and disorganized. On top of that, visualizing each other's work becomes difficult, which is really important as often your PI needs to review your experiments and make live adjustments and suggestions.
That's great. I know that obviously when I did my placement year, it was so hard to keep on top of everything. And I ended up having so many different bits of paper, post-it notes, scrap paper, to have all these random bits of information that I ended up losing and probably really needed. So is there a way that people that are starting to use Labstep or hoping to use Labstep are able to eradicate using paper, but still have somewhere that it can put notes down?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. It was quite stressful, as often those small but really important notes easily get lost in the sea of data that you have in that paper notebook. You know, things like need to order a batch of media or sample frozen in X location. And those little things can be, you know, really, really important. But with Labstep, that can easily be resolved. We have personal notes as well as a message board, which you can use for these kinds of tasks. These will show front and center in your workspace overview, and there you can upload files, images, or even data snippets. And then within experiments and protocols, there's also a notes section where you can add smaller, repetitive details, perhaps more specific to that experiment, and tag team members to notify them if there's something that needs to be done. For example, my PI could tag me to notify me that I need to change media in a specific set of samples. Comments, on the other hand, could be used for more direct communication and corrections that need to be made. A PI might see my experiment and then have a suggestion or correction to change a part of the protocol. And after that's done, I can click resolved and it will be cleared away. Ultimately, notes and comments provide a way to separate your smaller repetitive entries to your actual experiment entries to prevent either of them from being lost in the data or having an experiment entry with hundreds of changed media today sentences.
Great. I mean, so now that we've spoken through that, moving away from the individual setting to maybe an institute with many lab groups, do you have an example of that?
I do, yeah. So for academic lab groups, these guys typically consist of around 5 to 10 members, including one group leader, sometimes a co-lead, and then a handful of other scientists, such as postdoc research fellows and PhD students. And these groups often work under the same discipline. So just as a few examples, immunosurveillance or cancer stem cell biology. But that's quite a broad term. So each researcher will focus on a different branch of the discipline. And we work with a lot of these types of lab groups, with a great example being the Francis Crick Institute. They have over 1,500 scientists. They're all organized into lab groups. And Labstep is the official ELN for this London-based institute. So it's crucial that we provide a platform that facilitates intra-team collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear that we work with someone like that. I think Francis Crick is a very well-known name in the science world. So what would you say lab groups like the ones that Francis Crick prioritize, and how can features in Labstep help them have those priorities?
Yeah, what's important with a lab group like this, so an academic lab group, is visibility and accessibility. Again, we mentioned collections as a great tool to support scalability, but because of how versatile it is, it can also be applied to collaboration. Now, if we follow a hypothetical example group working under the discipline of cancer stem cells, under that umbrella will be a number of different projects and topics. So using collections, you can separate experiments and protocols by projects or topics. So for example, organoid modeling and neural cancer stem cells could be further broken down using sub-collections to, well, organoid modeling could become cerebral organoid modeling. And like folders on your desktop, collections allow you to separate work based on your own dictated structure, instead of just having a mass of everyone's projects together and having to search for things individually. On top of that, tags provide another level of control. You can create these tags and apply them to specific experiments, then filter with later on. So just as an example, you can have a tag that says further processing or synthesis, and then you can just tag the relevant experiments with this and use that as another layer of organization.
Great. I mean, it's so nice to see how tags, collections, workspaces all add these levels of hierarchy that in the end will help you collaborate and scale up with Labstep. So is there a way now, so once you finish your experiment, you've got it all tagged up, that users and specifically project leads can have a way of reviewing and signing off on the experiment?
Yeah, so in the experiment library, the default view is typically the table view, but you can change this to become the timeline view, which provides an interactive Gantt chart for project management. With this chart, or with this timeline view, you can visualize and plan past, present, and future experiments. You can also filter by the collections that you created, experiments that are assigned to you, as well as tags, which again allows you to focus on work that's relevant only to you. Speaking of the assigning tool, this allows you to digitally pass or hand over projects to team members. So for example, there's a long experiment workflow you have where one person might perform the first half and then another might perform the second half. The assigning feature allows you to grant collaborators the permissions to work on that work, which they previously may have not had access to before. And this makes it easier for them to locate the experiment as well. Alternatively, some researchers might have personal workspaces on top of their group workspace. In their personal workspace, they might write their experiments up initially, but with the sharing tools, you can share that work to the group workspaces to allow others to only view, which would be useful for things like protocols, or to also view and edit for a more hands-on approach to collaboration. And finally, to assist with these sharing tools, the activity log and time machine also allow you to view the audit trail of the changes that might have been made to your experiments and protocols, which includes a date and timestamp, as well as which team member changed the entry. That full visualization of the what, when, and who, and how things are changed prevents those needless forwards and backwards conversations of, hey, what did you do on this day? Or who added this inventory? And again, just reduces the chances of losing information in the data that's produced daily.
Yeah, I mean, it's so great to have a way to just quickly see who's doing what. You go in, you change the view, and you know exactly what's happening. And I know for so many labs, whether they're enterprise or academic, having that audit trail from the activity log is going to be so key. So could you tell us the best practice on when it comes to having your experiment completed?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. It's such an easy, low-fuss way of doing things.
Exactly.
But yeah, when your experiments are completed, Labstep's signature system allows researchers to just request signatures from their group leaders or PIs to then subsequently review and sign off for completion. This saves time, so researchers don't need to print off experiments and run to the office of the group leader for them to review. which could be, 10 floors up. And to summarize everything, these old school paper notebook processes, which traditionally are actually tedious, time consuming, and have poor visibility due to the lack of a proper audit trail, are all replaced by Labstep, which allows you to digitally and on one platform keep a secure record of these projects and then share them with colleagues regardless of where you are in the world.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ethan. So now that we've talked about individual academics and now lab groups as well, could you maybe give us some best practices for whole institutes wanting to use Labstep, especially those with more complex setups?
Yeah, of course. So with these complex, large international research institutes, we're currently working with some of these, some of these international institutes. And typically, these organizations are built up of multiple, sometimes up to 100 institutes, all located in different parts of the world. Within each institute that governs this organization, there are typically hundreds of employees, and it's our job as a team to work with them to figure out the best way to ensure that collaboration remains seamless. So, like the Francis Crick, the scientists here are typically separated into lab groups, which both work on separate projects and also occasionally work together. So inter and intra-team collaboration must be facilitated. However, often there are institute-wide shared inventories, such as a samples database or a chemical and material inventory, just as an example. And in these cases, with the chemical inventory, all groups must be able to use its items but not edit any of the resource categories or resources in it. That responsibility is left to a select few inventory managers of the institute. The samples database would be similar, but a little more relaxed in that groups should be able to add items and resources as well.
Great. So how does Labstep help in a use case like this one?
Yeah, so first of all, when you enter Labstep Pro and Enterprise, users gain access to the organization dashboard. This allows admins to organize workspaces and users at the organization level, meaning that each lab group can then have their own workspace with restricted access to only those who belong in a team. The samples database, as well as the chemical inventory, will also then have their own workspaces. However, everyone in the organization, even when newcomers join, will have default access to those. We then created 3 custom roles, inventory manager, a chemical inventory general user, and then samples database general user. The inventory manager then has complete liberty on anything that's inventory related, meaning they can add, edit, or delete anything from resource categories all the way to locations. Whereas the chemical inventory general user can only edit or delete items, and that's just so that they can fill in any metadata fields or delete items that are empty. Samples database general users work similarly, but have a little more flexibility, as they can also add resources as well as items. And that's just because samples are created quite often compared to chemicals, and having to constantly rely on an inventory manager to update this would just defeat the purpose of time saving. Now, once the roles and permissions are set, and since the settings in workspaces are self-contained, we then just set the roles in the workspaces accordingly. And to reiterate, those roles would be different to the lab group workspaces. They're specific only to the inventory ones.
So yeah, just to go back on that last part that you said, how can users have access to the items in the inventory workspaces if they're not in their respective workspaces?
Yeah, and there's a really great question. And there's a few ways that you could do that. But one of the ways Labstep can work is that if you have access to another workspace, you can see and use their inventory in your own experiments and protocols in your workspace. And when you do use them, say, for example, I use a chemical in the chemical inventory in an experiment and deduct the amount used, it'll automatically update the data in the original inventory as well. For samples, the same applies. But when you add new samples, users can just add these to existing resources in their workspace. Then the workspace owners, which are typically group leaders, will have set up the auto-sharing rules to automatically and regularly share all resources from the group workspace into the samples database. And just to summarize everything, This setup provides a clean and consistent central source of truth system, which keeps everything updated, regardless of how many researchers are using the inventories. Ultimately, this bypasses the need of retroactively updating information, which not only saves time, but also reduces the chance of forming data silos and lowers the risk of inaccuracies. And with the flexibility that the Labstep platform provides, this is just one of many answers to the setup. We could do it in a couple of other ways. And so rest assured that if the team can support some of the large international research institutes that we work with, we can also support you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ethan. Right, now we'll open up the floor for some questions. We'll give our attendees a few minutes to type out their questions. So in the meantime, Ethan, can you give us a summary of the whole webinar, of the topics that you talked about today?
Sure. So just to summarize everything, transitioning from paper to digital notebooks, such as Labstep, gives you a centralized platform that's updated in real time. This facilitates intra and inter-team collaboration that might not be possible with paper notebooks. Moreover, Labstep provides many tools that facilitate collaboration, such as custom roles and permissions, which can be assigned per team member and per workspace. There's also the multiple sharing tools that we have, such as the Assign To feature and the auto sharing tool to share almost any module of Labstep, whether it be within the same workspace or across a different one. There's also the notes, comments, and the message board, which allows you to separate your personal to-do lists with your experiment entry. And this allows for better visibility and accessibility on daily tasks. And lastly, the signature system, which just streamlines the signing process between you and your group members. So all in all, Labstep's collaborative tools apply to research groups of any size, whether it be individual academics or entire research institutes that might be dotted around internationally with more complex requirements for setting up the organization. The team can tailor to Labstep to best fit you and your workflow to ensure optimal team collaboration, ultimately driving productivity up.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ethan. Amira, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, not yet. But I did have a few questions while we just wait for maybe some of them to come through. So you mentioned that you have these 3 custom roles with the roles and permissions. My first question is called a two-parted one. Is that who can access to make these roles? And secondly, is the 3 roles that you mentioned the only ones that you can have?
Yeah, so to answer your question, with the custom roles and permissions, you can create as many custom roles as you want with all different permissions. That's up to you. The default that you get is viewer, editor, and owner. But yeah, like I said, you could make intern, inventory manager. It's up to you. And who can access these? The custom roles and permissions feature is for our pro and enterprise users, and typically the admins are the only ones who can create these roles, just to keep everything nice and organized and preventing everyone from just creating loads of different roles and giving themselves permissions.
Nice. Still everyone's either really, really happy with the webinar or they haven't managed to type out their questions yet. But yeah, you mentioned that you can share your experiments either across workspaces or within the app and assign them to different people. I know that some people have external places that they use their experiments in. Is there a way of sort of getting them out of the platform to be able to use in that format?
Yeah, Anoä, do you want to take this one?
I think Amira really wants to answer this one.
Yeah, I really do. I wanted to answer my own question really. And I just wanted to emphasize that Labstep, as much as it is a progressive web app, also has some actual desktop apps that you can download, one of them being Export Client. And with this, you can export your experiments in a PDF, JSON, or HTML file.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Great stuff. Technology, API, love it.
Yeah. So I don't know if we have any more questions, but just wanted to say that this webinar has been recorded, so you can rewatch it on demand, either on our help center, which will be available in the next couple of days, or on our YouTube channel. And that will give you also the opportunity to share share the recording with your collaborators as well. And if you are an individual academic trying to get your lab group set up, or if you're trying to get buy-in from your whole institute to use Labstep, then feel free to reach out to us using our email address, which is info@labstep.com, and we will be more than happy to help you out. We can also provide a demo for yourself and your collaborators. And if you share an example of the typical things that you're trying to achieve, moving away from paper to an ELN, then we can even tailor the demo to your specific research field. And then lastly, we are building a Labstep community. And so it's a community of Labstep users, obviously. And if you're interested in joining, then reach out as well using our email address. So once again, that's info@labstep.com. And basically the Labstep community will enable you to have access to unreleased features and test them out before everyone else. And you'll be also able to have feedback sessions with our product managers and kind of share your experience, your user experience of Labstep, and contribute to the development of the platform and potentially new features that we'll release as well. And as an extra thing as well of being part of Labstep, the Labstep community, and being a Labstep champion, you will also be able to be featured in our newsletter within our user spotlight. So we can conduct a user interview, get to know a little bit more about you and what you're doing, and then we'll include that in our newsletter. And if you want as well, we can also include your social links and maybe journals that you have published.
Great. Sounds like you could always be a Labstep influencer.
Basically, yeah. We also have merch.
We do have merch, guys. We have stickers. Amazing.
Right.
Well, we had one question in the chat at the same time where you were saying that it was going to be recorded and sent out. So I have answered the person that used that. So Anoä, I don't think we're having any more questions. Obviously, Ethan, you've done a great job of covering everything today.
There we go.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you so much for being here, guys. And thank you so much to all of our attendees. It was really wonderful to have a couple of questions from you, but I guess it's because webinars was so good you had no questions. But yeah, once again, this webinar will be available on demand on our YouTube channel and in our help center in the next couple of days. And if you have any other questions, or if you'd like to book a demo with us, or would like to know more about anything that we talked about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@labstep.com. All right, my name is Anoä. Thank you so much for being here. It was Labstep for Success collaboration, and see you in the next webinar. Bye.
Thanks, Anoä. Thanks,
Thanks,
Ethan.
Anoä.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.